Hey, I'm Shay Warner, and you are listening to Casual Cattle Conversations. If you are ready to explore different management practices and focus on improving your operation and the beef industry, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited you are listening. Hey folks, it is Shay again, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Casual Cattle Conversations. Today, we are visiting with Andrew Uden, and we're going to be talking about HerdDogg. And that is a company that he is really leading the charge with. It's a technology company, but in addition to talking about HerdDogg, we are really going to be diving into the challenges we face as ranchers more than anything. So we're going to start off the conversation talking about the challenges that ranchers are facing, what it looks like, what it means for us, and kind of steps we can take to get ahead of those in the years to come. And then Andrew's really going to dive into some of the options for technology, whether it's your very simplistic forms all the way up to collecting a lot of data like HerdDogg can do for so many cattle producers, and how that can play a role in different operations. So this producer is really for any of you cow-calf producers who are just interested in how to get ahead of the game in the coming years and be more efficient with your time. So with that, let's visit with Andrew. All right, Andrew. Well, good morning. It is great to have you on the show today, and we're going to be talking a little bit about your background in the beef industry, which is unique and diverse, but really I'm excited to talk about the egg technology side of things, specifically with HerdDogg, and really how technology is finding its place in the cow-calf industry specifically, though. So thank you for hopping on today and having this conversation.
Thanks for having me, Shay. I'm excited to have the conversation and be on the show.
All right. Well, I know right now you are in Western Nebraska, but you travel a lot. You have lived in a lot of different places and done a lot of things. But let's start with where you're at today. So kind of what does life look like for you briefly related to the beef industry? I know it might be hard to say briefly with as much as you're doing, but as far as what you're doing in the beef industry today, can you kind of share with the listeners what that looks like?
Yeah, so today I run HerdDogg, which is a company that I'm CEO of. Wasn't the founder, but was brought in to kind of help get the company back up and going and get new technology out in the industry. But that's just one hat. I still feed cattle at our family feed yard here, and kind of depends on who you ask. Some people will say Western Nebraska, some people say Central Nebraska. We're west of Kearney, but still east of North Platte, so right on the Platte Valley. So I still feed cattle there. I'm there working at least at once a week on different projects, feed mill projects, cattle induction software, carcass data, all sorts of things like that for our operation and for getting data back to our customers. So I spend a lot of time with our office staff on that. We do run a commercial cow herd, and my brother-in-law runs a purebred cow herd. So calving season's coming up. I just installed a new security and camera system into all of our barns, and I'm going to be back here to help with calving. So I still maintain an active role in the family businesses. I do some consulting for other ranching operations kind of around the country. Like you said, I travel a lot for HerdDogg, but also for some consulting, mainly on technology management, and not just technology like HerdDogg, but what vaccines to use, implants, programs, things like that, working with different supply chain partners. So yeah, I wear a lot of other hats, but that's probably the best description of what I do in terms of day in, day out, cowboying all the way up to meeting with other CEOs. So.
I appreciate you talking about the different types of technology, because sometimes I think we overcomplicate what technology is when really technology can be simple. It's a tool that helps us. So
exactly. And there's broad range of technologies, and so we have to be careful when we just say that word. But I will jokingly say in the feedlot, full technology cattle and no technology cattle. And full technology cattle might mean full traceability, genomics, but it also might mean an implant and antibiotics and a ionophore or beta agonist, So we try and define those into different programs and different things that customers want to see.
Now, in the past, you've traveled and lived abroad, correct?
Yes, yes, pretty extensively. I'm one of the few Nebraskans that holds a passport and uses it.
Well, I think you could say that about a lot of Americans and Midwesterners in general too. I've never used mine. I have one, but I haven't made a chance to use it yet. So with you, I guess talk a little bit about why you went abroad and like what you were doing in the ag space when you were abroad, just so people get a little bit of idea of what you've been involved with in the past.
Yeah, so I originally went abroad in 2018. I was doing mission trips in Africa and kind of saw a big need for, obviously the mission of the church we were with, but um, just the kind of raw agricultural potential of all the land around us that nobody seemed to either realize or capitalize on or do anything about. So that kind of put a spark in my brain. But I didn't get back to Africa for a few years. But when I came back, I wanted to travel more. So um, I set up an opportunity to go study economics in Scotland at the University of Aberdeen. They've got a really good international economics and trade program. So I did a semester there and kind of spent my weekends going out and looking at Angus cattle up in the mountains and, having this idyllic, Scottish ag student experience because we do raise Angus and some Angus cattle here. So it's neat to
Mhm.
get back to the birthplace. And then the second half of that year, I went to Australia and I worked at a purebred Angus bull stud that sold a lot of bulls out into the outback for crossbreeding Brangus programs. And so they did a lot of genomics work with Brahmins, Brawn, and Thule Industries over there, and then kind of brought back Angus genetics into it. And then I worked for a large cattle feed yard, which was tied to AACO, so big, major agricultural holding company that have about 14 stations. And so we were the feedlot, one of the two feedlot stations. And I really wanted to do that because I wanted to see things, a different mindset of how cattle are raised, a different economic system around, feeding cattle, grass feeding cattle, what makes sense for different types of cattle, and then just see how do they do it at scale. I mean, we ran 5,000 head with four guys, and on a bull stud, collecting all the same data, doing all the same things purebred guys have to do here, and just having to do it at a bigger scale and do it year round. There was no frost over there, so we were constantly having to be in summer mode all the time. It seemed like, and then at the cattle station, we were running a very high number of cows per employee. I couldn't even tell you the number off the top of my head, but just the vast amount of work that you could get out of one person by eliminating inefficiencies in the system. And so I've tried to bring that mindset back. I did get a chance to go over to Russia when all of that was happening with taking U.S. genetics to Russia. Um, I was AI technician in college, so I went over and bred cows one summer. We bred 3,600 head in 8 days, and then I stayed for the duration of the summer doing all the bull quarantine work and everything for our cleanup bulls, and eventually decided Russia was not for me and came home. But and then yeah, lately, I guess pre-COVID, for about 18 months, I lived in East Africa. We were building a large commercial seed operation for kind of private seed companies in East Africa, but we do work with Corteva, and we were doing work with Pioneer, which is or Pioneer, which is Pioneer's brand in Africa. So yeah, we were raising seed corn and seed beans and kind of grazing cattle around the edges, using them more as a tool for weeding and uh, pressure than anything else. But yeah, it was a good eye-opening experience and a great opportunity till COVID hit. But that's what brought me home. So I'm not necessarily mad about COVID.
Well, you certainly have an extensive background in all that you've done and continue to do. But with that, what are some of those main challenges you have seen in the cow calf space and are continuing to see today that you think the industry as ranchers needs to kind of be more aware of and focus on and recognize as a true challenge?
Yeah, I mean, there's a myriad of issues, and they go all the way. I see all the way from genetics and genomics operations all the way through to when they walk into the plant. And And even in our own family business, I see that. But everybody in the middle part of the industry, everybody talks about labor. It's a constant issue. It's going to continue to plague us. I read a lot of macroeconomic trends, and population in the U.S. is not leaning in our favor. When I was in school, which was a few years before you, we were in a similar program. They said 2% of the 2% of the U.S. eats the other 98%. And then I was watching the Purdue football game this year with Nebraska, and they ran an ad that said 1% feeds 99%. I said, that's a big jump in 10 years.
Yeah,
So it's cutting it in
I've
half
still been
again.
saying 2% or hearing 2%. So I'd be curious to when they made that switch to one feeds 99. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was the Purdue University actually ran the ad during the football game this year, and I started looking into it, and I said, yeah, it's a lot closer to 1 than it is to 2. So I guess they made the switch sometime in the
Mhm.
last year. So labor continues to be an issue, and skilled labor is certainly a big part of that. We have a lot of young people that are coming in that they necessarily didn't grow up on farms. My wife's a great example. Her family is an ag background, but her parents primarily worked in cities, on the eastern side of South Dakota, Sioux Falls, and some of the little towns around there. Her dad was a mechanic. Grew up on a ranch. She would go back to the ranch in the summers, but didn't have that experience. But she married me, and she got thrown into everything. She goes and sorts cows, and she's on horses, and she loves that part of the life, as much as she can get it. So, but my family's had to learn to be patient with her. She didn't grow up in it, but she's labor, and she shows up when we need her to. And so I think there will be labor challenges. There will be challenges with skilled labor, and the older generations are going to have to be patient with the people who do want to be involved. We can't be choosy. So that's a big issue, and giving people technology that can help train people faster, or help solve some of those solutions and inefficiencies in the labor we do have is going to be a big piece of it. The other big trend I'm seeing, and this is primarily looking at the feedlot back to our ranch customers, because we are a custom feeder. So 90% of the cattle in our feed yard a lot of them are still rancher owned. So we work with ranchers from Alberta to southern Missouri and all the way as far west as California, sending cattle to us, trusting us to feed them to market. And we see it with a lot of our customers. We're seeing this trend towards programs, and programs are a great thing if you know how to manage, not just to the program, but manage to get your cattle into a lot of programs. I've seen a lot of our customers go really hard down one path to get some kind of value add. And then if that program went away, or they did one little thing wrong, their cattle got kicked out, they were right back with all the commodity cattle that they were trying to get away from. And so I've started advising people, okay, if you want to be this specific NHTC program, and you've bred your cattle to be really successful in that program, let's look at some of the other programs around it that are similar, but maybe maybe a slightly lower premium, but also a slightly lower bar to get in. And let's make sure we check all of their boxes as well. So if that program goes away, you still have a value addition for the cattle that you work so hard on any one of these other 4 marketing options. You're not just going right back to the commodity business that you were. Had a really good, actually on my consulting business, had a really good client in Colorado that they wanted to do large grass-fed organic. And they had the land and the resources to do that. Well, the first year they went to sell their organic calves, they didn't have a name yet, so they didn't have a lined up system. So they sold them on Superior. Guy in Western Kansas buys them. They call him and they said, what did you end up doing? What program did they go into? He goes, oh, I bought them because they were organic, and I knew I could stick an implant in them and they'd be perfect. They'd just take right off. And kind of upset my client. And I said, well, hey, like, you still got the value you wanted out of them. If they wanted to pay that for cattle they were going to put an implant in, that's on the feedlot. But
Mhm.
so this year, let's look at, okay, if you want to raise them organic, fine. If you're not part of a program yet, fine. But there's a lot of things under organic. If they're organic, you can still qualify for natural. You can still qualify for NHTC. There's 20 other things you can qualify for if you want to take them the next step and retain value. And so, I tell people don't box yourself in. A lot of programs are coming online. It's a trend we're going to continue to see in this industry. Some people call it the small beef trend, where you also see a lot more ranchers selling directly, right? But you're going to see bigger brands doing things too. When I was in Australia, and this was 14 years ago now, when I was in Australia, they had brands for everything. Every major company, JBS in Australia had 9 brands. So they would bring in all these cattle, some of them special and some of them just commodity cattle, but they had different ways to sort all of those cattle. So they didn't just have beef coming out the other end. They had a branded product for almost every animal coming in. Even you'd see these big, 7 foot tall Brahmins coming in off the outback. You're like, what brand are those going to go into? Well, they had a historic brand that was based on Brahmin specs, grass-fed Brahmin specs, and they could take all those Brahmin cattle and put them right into that brand. And so, it was interesting for me to see that even the big corporations doing things at massive scale, we're still thinking about how do we add value, because you can't just sell beef anymore. In that market, there were a few years ahead of us. You couldn't just sell beef; you had to sell the story. And I think that's we've heard this a lot, but it's going to become bigger and bigger and bigger as we face pressure from other proteins. I don't really. I tell ranchers, don't get mad at your neighbor or the rancher down the road or a state away. We're all in the beef industry. We are competing with fish. We are competing with chicken. We are competing with pork. People are very selective about the protein they eat. So if beef is the most expensive, we've got to tell the story, and we've got to give them an eating experience that they enjoy. Our generation certainly is willing to pay more for food, but they want to know more about that food, and they want to have the story around it, right? I'm not an influencer. I don't do a lot on social media, but everybody around me does, and they have all these influencers. Cleaning products, like my mom and my mother-in-law and my wife are, oh, this person tells we got to try this, we got to try this, and I'm like, it's a cleaning product. But
and it could that influencer could be one of their best friends who it might only have like really 50 people. Like, you don't have an influencer doesn't have to be a large following to be making an impact and telling a story, because it ripples down. And that's a huge thing with advocacy too. And those are probably the more, I don't want to say more effective, because I know some very effective larger scale influencers, but those micro influencers, as they're being called, are extremely effective from a trust standpoint.
Absolutely, absolutely. The best local beef influencer I've ever met is an attorney in Lincoln. He buys beef from one of the little slaughterhouses here in central Nebraska, and he'll buy the steer. It's a state run packing plant, so it's not federally inspected. So he'll buy the steer and have it slaughtered, and then he'll go tell all of his attorney buddies and doctor buddies in Lincoln and Omaha, hey, I bought this steer from this rancher, and then you can kill it at this butcher shop. You get the whole thing. They tell you. And he's just so vocal about it that I have these random lawyers from Lincoln and Omaha calling me saying, hey, can you connect us with somebody that has a steer? Or could you get us a half a beef or a quarter beef? And it's just like, we went from like me selling a quarter or a half a year to a lawyer, or maybe a full steer, to, we're doing like 40 or 50 head a year, just as a little side thing for my brother and sister-in-law and some local ranchers here. And I said, look, I mean, you guys don't even have to work that hard. If you got 4 or 5 guys like this, that's a whole full-time business for half of you guys. So
Yeah, absolutely. And
influencer, but his ripple effect is huge.
Yeah. And so as we're talking about, this is a great way to enter into what you're doing with HerdDogg, because as you're talking about these value added programs, and really what I'm kind of catching from that is understanding the value of your calves now and different avenues you can go to really capture that and get what they're worth. And that's something that I've talked about on my Rancher Mind series. Actually, your dad's going to be on one of the Rancher Mind calls coming up in March to talk a little bit about feedlot relationships and stuff too. That's a different topic than what we're focused on today, but it's all tied together, because with those programs, producers need a way to capture data on their calves. And like you talked about with the labor standpoint, we need a way to capture that data and utilize it to make more effective management decisions. So, and that's something that HerdDogg has so many different options and is it, it just has, it can be applied in so many different ways to so many unique operations. I think you should talk about what HerdDogg is, to kind of talk about how this technology can play a role for the rancher.
Yeah, yeah. So HerdDog was is kind of this next generation of cattle wearables. So, cattle wearables, ways of collecting data, live data off animals goes back to the 90s really. Early radios and pedometers and things like that on cows. And to today, with HerdDog, we have a Bluetooth tag. Works off of same principle as all your earphones and your cars and everything. It's just got a much longer range, but it's a Bluetooth tag, so it can collect a lot of data, can stream a lot of data, either to a base station or directly to your phone if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you don't have a base station. And it pulls that data in and does a kind of really quick, fairly instant analysis to say, okay, here's your activity patterns. Here's the animal's, ear temp, which is kind of a, um, more of a environmental temperature, but it's also influenced by the either heat release or non-release from the animal. So if it's 106 and you have an animal that's 107, you know that they're releasing a lot more heat and they probably have some kind of issue. Um, so it's pulling that data in constantly. We know we're pulling in data because of how we designed it every 6 minutes, 24 hours a day. So you're getting 480 data points per animal per day. It's like having a set of eyes on that cow all the time. Imagine if you could tell your activity, your animal every 6 minutes of the day. There's a lot of things you can do with that. So where we focus that technology early on for the rancher is estrus. You're seeing a huge uptick in AI and in timed breeding. Even if they're not using AI, they're using some form of timed breeding with bulls. So estrus detection. Um, we're looking really hard into calving right now. We're fairly confident we can get a strong calving algorithm after this season. We've got enough tags out now. We've got enough feedback coming in. Like we tell people, if there's something you want an algorithm before we can build it, we just need observable data. We need tags on your cows and we need good observations back from you, and we can kind of work with you to get that algorithm what you need. And then illness is the big one we spent a ton of time on, because it doesn't, that doesn't just go for the rancher, it goes for the feedlot or the calf ranch. If you're in the dairy industry background, or dairy cows, all cattle get sick, and we need to be able to find those cattle early. Our goal is to find them 2 to 3 days before a human being would normally see them, and get in with an early administration of either a drug, some kind of antibiotic, like a lower grade antibiotic. You don't have to hit them with Draxxin or Baytril right off the bat. You can give them something weaker like LA200, and usually they're just fine. We've got a producer that every time they've flagged, he's given them transdermal Banamine because he's catching them early enough. He just wants to break that fever and get them out of it. And he's had incredible success. So he said, I haven't even hit these calves with a needle. Well, that's a fantastic story to tell, because transdermal Banamine is not an antibiotic. You can keep those cattle in a lot of programs,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not hitting them with a needle. So if you're keeping replacements, every time you have to treat a replacement heifer, the odds of her falling out of your herd earlier goes up. So his is all about, how do I keep the needles out? How do I manage these things better for my herd going forward? So, HerdDogg's really a data analytics company that built an ear tag to get the data. And, so we push hard into data.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, because we're collecting data every 6 minutes, 24 hours a day, we know where that data is collected based on where your phone is or where the base station that's reading the data is. So we can also give you a level of traceability and transparency into that traceability. When did they check in over here versus over here? Did they leave the property and check in somewhere else? Did they check into a truck driver's phone as they were going down the road? There's all these different things we can do on the shipping and transparency of transportation side, that just continue to further increase value for people trying to keep their cattle in programs or just know where they are. That's a really simple one, is just knowing where your cows are and if they're reporting in where they're supposed to be.
And that's really one of the cool things about HerdDogg, at least that I've thought or noticed in the conversations that we've had leading up to this, is just how flexible it can be for each operation. I mean, regardless of kind of what your goal is, really where you're headed. If you are a cow calf producer, there's more than likely more than one way that HerdDogg can allow you to collect data to help you make more effective management decisions. So I also want to talk about, go back to that labor standpoint. You talked about how, labor, that's a challenge. And I've been hearing this since, I mean, I guess I'm only 24, but I've been hearing it since I was in junior high or high school, right? Like even when dad had everyone home to help, it always felt like we never had enough help. And then my sister and I were both gone, and then it was just mom and dad. And it's like, it's just labor is a challenge. And my husband and I see it on our own operation today. So, how is this technology impacting that labor component for cattle producers? Because I know some people might say, well, now I have the data that takes more time to manage it, which is more labor. But then also, how can it help reduce labor as well?
Yeah, so I look at it. It's gonna depend on how you use it, but guys that go from once a day breeding because they don't have time to go and do heat checks, you could now do accurate heat checks and do time breeding to the cow. So your increase in efficiency if you're artificially inseminating those animals will go up significantly because you're going to go back to a natural program. And we've seen over and over again when you're on a natural program, you're saving money because you're not having to give all the sync drugs, but you're just also able to get a better response to that semen, or if you're using embryos, much better response to the embryos. Um, Andrew and I can go out there every hour and see which cow's riding, right? It's going to tell you this cow was riding. Here's your heat window, right? So that's a big labor savings for people that are in focused on improving through reproductive means, whether it's AI or embryos. Another thing that we're working on, this is why we're specifically working on calving, is we will check cows every 2 to 4 hours when we're calving because we calve heavy and we sync everything, so it's a lot of work. But if we could take that from every let's say on average every 3 hours with 2 3 guys to every 5 hours with two guys, because we now know exactly what's calved or what needs attention. We can now split guys off to go do other things because you're not going to get rid of people. There's always something that needs done that didn't get done. It's just allowing us to get some of those hours back in our day to get those things done.
Well, and I
The
think, not to interrupt, but even on the calving side, when you look at night checks for producers who are in colder environments, like being able to see that algorithm and know, like, okay, I don't have to go out every 2 hours tonight because they can trust that things are going to be okay for the most part. I mean, because that's when you go out at 2 in the morning and nothing's going on, it's kind of like, well, it's nice that I can go right back in, but at the same time, it's like, could have just stayed in bed.
Exactly. You run out in the middle of the night, and I do it often. You'll always take like the middle of the night check because then I can get a couple hours of sleep and I can get a few hours of sleep. For some
Mhm.
reason I'm groggy, but I'll always take that like 1 or 2 a.m. shift, and you'll go out and you're like, oh, all right, gonna have to do something, and you'll go walk around and you're like, there's nothing. I could have just stayed in bed. So it's getting that little bit of time back is valuable, but more importantly to us, it's how much are you disturbing those animals when you go out? I've walked through a pen of heifers a lot and walked in to see a heifer pushing, turn around, see me, and stop
Mhm.
pushing, and she wasn't having any issue before I got there. So to be able to watch that animal and say, okay, she started, I'm just going to watch her for an hour to see if it changes, see if her activity changes, see if her temperature spikes, anything that's going to happen that now tells me I have to go help, right? That's what we're really looking at. And we're not quite there yet, but as we get more data, we get more observable data. So observations back from producers, we can start to act on that and create more sophisticated algorithms for producers. So it's really looking forward and saying, okay, what do people want it? What do people want to use it for in the next 5 years, right? I had somebody say, well, I tried those net collars. That's another great technology, is these virtual fencing net collars.
Mhm.
They said, but it was overkill for what I wanted to do. I really just want to know if they're in or if they're out, and my pastures are next to a highway. And I said, well, we could set the alerts to be more time sensitive. So not every 20 minutes, but every 10 minutes or every 5 minutes. And we could position our base stations so that the edge of the range is the fence perimeter. And now if your cows leave range, it'll send you an alert and to go put them back in. And that's a lot of, wasn't what we designed it for. We just designed a tag with a lot of uses, but it's something they want to use it for. They don't necessarily need the power of events or a caller, but they need something. They know they need something. Will our solution fit? Can we help them make it fit? So yeah, a lot of what we do is just how can we help you solve your problems? If our technology is the best fit, obviously we're going to use our technology. If it's not, I spend a lot of time with other technology companies. Jack Keating was in the same program I was. He's with Caller. There's a lot of these that we can bounce back and forth and say, hey, you need to go talk to this guy, or you need to go talk to this guy. I think my background growing up on a ranch and a custom feed yard, especially the custom feed yard side of me, we tell customers all the time, we may not be the best feed yard for your cattle. Here's a great yard, or we don't have room. Here's a better yard to go to that's closer to you, or better basis or something. Mm-hmm. You've got to be in the business of solving people's problems. That's how, if you solve their problems, you create customers, right? So we try and solve problems. Another thing that we did put a light on these tags, a really ultra bright daylight visible LED light, but at nighttime, it looks like you can light up cattle like a Christmas tree. And so I've seen guys that'll create a heavy list of what they think is due, or the cows they've pulled up into their pen. And then they'll just say, okay, I'm going to physically check them, but I'm going to turn on the lights of the ones I want to check. And then, in a pen of 200 cows, they got 4, and they go, okay, there's one there, there, and there. So now they're not walking the whole pen. They're looking at the ones that need attention, and they're going on with the rest of their day. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing with illness. You can ride your pasture for hours, or you can just turn on the 10 head that need attention. And you may treat them, you may not treat them, but those are the ones you needed to look at.
Jack has been on the show before to talk about virtual fencing and a part of the Ranch and Mine program too, to share some of that. He's got a lot of cool stuff going on that can definitely help cattle producers if that's what they're looking for. And with what you're doing too, I mean, I think that's just so important. Like you said, you're in the business of solving problems for people, because whether you're the solution or not, you can help cattle producers, you can help feedlots, you can help whoever it is you're helping in the beef industry find what they're looking for. And I think that's something we all need to remember, is that we need to collaborate and not be so competitive within the industry itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a great example to me is a really young kind of cattleman coming into the industry. I would spend a lot of time out at the bull shows at Denver, because I would fit bulls for people in college. And my great uncle was a big bull breeder here in Nebraska, Angus bull breeder, and I actually got a job with one of his kind of rival breeders. And I knew the two were, kind of somewhat friends, but both of them actually helped each other's business so much. They would literally bring customers to the other producer's sale and say, oh, these bulls will work better for you than some of the bulls I have. I'll breed bulls in the future, but what you need right now is at this guy's sale. And they were so collaborative, even though they were competitors in a fairly small region, right? But it made, people knew that, and people trusted both of them, and both, as a result, both of their businesses flourished. So yeah, we need to be in the business of solving problems, not just trying to be the lowest cost producer, or try and undercut our neighbors, or tear anybody down and say, well, the way I raise cattle is better than the way he raises cattle. Well, cattle are healthy and they make it to market. I think you're doing a good job.
Yep. And if the consumer has a good eating experience after that,
exactly.
A+, you got it.
Path they took could be very different. And every path has its challenges, but we need to look at how, the value we create and how we want to market it, not necessarily tear down somebody else's marketing. That's the issue I've had with some of the, outside groups that have come in and tried to influence the industry. And you can tell them pretty fast. It's the people that are pointing fingers saying you have to do this because everything else you do is wrong. That tends to not be somebody from inside the industry, right?
Right. So, you know, you I didn't intend to go on a cattle marketing rabbit hole earlier, but I really liked what we were talking about because that's something that, it's important to everyone. Everyone's marketing their cattle in some form or fashion. And I know whether it's my listeners or my membership, cattle marketing is something they're always craving more information on. So with HerdDogg, are there ways to collect some of that data that is relevant to the cattle marketing side and helping people figure out which value added programs they may fit into, because there are so many programs out there that producers can be a part of? So does HerdDog have the capability to either capture some of that important data or maybe input some of it extra so that it's tied to each animal? What are the capabilities there?
Yeah, so we're looking at creating, somewhat of an insights portal, which could be on an industry level basis of, these are the types of cattle that are using more antibiotics, or these are the type of cattle that are performing better from a health perspective, or they're moving more, they're eating more, all of this for different programs like NHTC or natural. We'd like to partner with genomics companies. We're in conversations about how do we do that to collect that data, put it into a usable format so people can see the animals as they come online with HerdDog. They can see the animals, they can look at their behavior, they can look at their health status, and they can say, okay, early on, I'm going to make this decision or this decision, and I can sort my cattle different ways. So that's the forward leading edge of what HerdDog is trying to do, is that kind of broader industry
Mhm.
insight, and bringing it down to an individual producer's cattle. It's just, but to do that takes collaboration. We've got to work with genomics companies. We've got to work with other data collection companies because we need to know what's happening to those cattle outside of just their activity and their temperature and the behavior, right? But with that, we do collect a lot more data than pretty much anybody, so on a per head basis. So we can start to do that. The other thing that I'm looking at even on my own cattle is, if I want to go into the right now the highest value program that's kind of commoditized would be one of the natural programs. So if I want to keep my cattle natural, I cannot give an antibiotic and I can't use feed additives or hormones, certain feed additives or hormones.
Mhm.
So we talked about technology. I consider all of those technologies. So that to me is a technology light program. Well, if I'm using HerdDog, there are feed additives that are natural feed additives that can have a very similar effect to CTC, but you have to get the animals very early in that disease cycle, right? So if I'm using HerdDog, can I catch enough of the animals early enough that I can intervene with an all natural feed product and keep that pen of cattle or that herd of calves that it's weaning, keep them natural longer? Because the longer I can keep them in a high value program, like I said earlier, the more options I have. If it comes to the point where I have to use an antibiotic, okay, well, I'll use an antibiotic and then I can put them in an NHTC program. They're not performing, they're still having issues with death loss. Maybe then I'll pull them out, give them a growth promotant, and put them back into a more commoditized, general beef industry program. So, we want to use that data to say, how do we catch things early? How do we manage cattle better to fit into these different slots and know when to, the worst thing you could do is try and keep cattle in a program that they aren't a good fit for. And you just keep putting money into those cattle and then eventually they fall out of the program. You want to be able to make that decision as early as you can.
Yeah. So we have covered a lot of ground in 30, 40 minutes, wherever we're at now. I think we're closer to 40. And I mean, we could probably talk for 3 hours about all this stuff with as much as you're doing, and just the exciting capabilities of technology today. But as we kind of wrap up the conversation and you think about the cow calf industry 10, 15, or even 20 years from now, what do you think commercial cow calf producers need to be keeping in mind as they start setting themselves up to move forward?
Yeah, I think you always need to look at what technology is doing in the rest of the world, and at least ask the question or be curious to say, what are those technologies going to do in my world? So, HerdDogg, one of the nicknames for HerdDogg is the Fitbit for cattle. Um, we saw, and especially during COVID, an explosion of wearable watches for people that could tell you pretty early on if you were developing COVID symptoms. I know people that wear the I have epilepsy, and I know a lot of people that have epilepsy that wear them to track seizures, or they wear them for heart conditions monitoring. So that is directly correlated to what HerdDogg is trying to do in cattle down the road, right? It's the exact same thing. We're looking at all these electric cars come into the vehicle, and I know some people think that's a fad. Depending on the day, I think it's a fad. But my grandpa, who's a big tractor guy, he looks at it and he says, "Well, hey, an electric generated tractor would actually have more torque." So we need to, okay, if the batteries get good enough and the life gets good enough, is that going to change our tractors? Probably could, probably might or will. So we can't ignore what's going on in the rest of the world and think that ranching's isolated. We need to, we need, like I said, we need to be curious. We need to, look at those things.
All right, Andrew. Well, thank you for being on the show today. And I know I definitely got a lot out of this interview. There's no doubt in my mind that those listening got even more out of it. This is definitely one of those that you may even want to listen to more than once just to pick up on something else each time you listen. But before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I think the big thing I think about every day and what keeps me up and excited about the industry is the amount of big data and technology that is coming into the industry. And we talked about the labor problem, and we talked about how we're going to get around that. We will attract more young people back into the industry with some of this technology, with some of the things that excite people again. The dairy industry, not that I want to compare ranchers to dairies, but the dairy industry has certainly found a way to get more technology. They got more of their life back, and they're seeing more and more of their kids come back to the dairies because they don't have to milk cows twice a day anymore. They've got automated milkers and all this other stuff, and they're seeing bigger generational transfers, and they're seeing those people come back in. And so I think if we can adopt even a percentage of that level of technology, or that technology mindset about being curious with these new technologies, you are going to see more people come back in. You're going to see more food companies that want to integrate directly with ranchers and work directly with them to create value. And big data, what we're doing at HerdDogg, data analytics and insights, all of that kind of sits at the core of, how do we make better animals that fit the consumer palate and are more, efficient to run on grass and easier for the ranchers to manage. All of that goes into that package around big data.
All right. Well, thank you again, and you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate you having me on.
And that's a wrap on that one, folks. For more information about HerdDogg, if you want to connect with Andrew, feel free to reach out to me on my website. But more importantly, head to the HerdDogg website. All those links are in the show notes once you finish listening to the episode. Have a great day.